Church production is still a new world that is being explored. Audio, lighting, graphic design, and videography all play a huge role in modern churches and how they operate. However, how did we get here today? The big topic that churches are talking about is where to draw the line with live production. When is it too much? When is it not enough? The answer to these questions comes to two schools of thought. The idea of loving high production during worship versus disagreeing with it to stay away from what is being considered mainstream church. The theology behind church production has changed drastically from the early 1900s to today. In order to get a full understanding of how churches have gotten to this point, let's look at the background. In the early 1900s, church was a very simple term. When someone said the word church, they would most likely relate it to a very traditional-looking building with stained glass and traditional artwork. Traditional churches normally have pews for seating and an area for the choir on stage to lead in worship. As far as lighting, an older church mostly is lit from natural sunlight through the windows. This is the way it was for churches earlier because they didn't have any of the modern technology we have now. When we imagine church today, we think of a modern-style building with a congregation inside ready for worship. This church has hundreds of individual chairs in a wide auditorium that is dimly lit to create a worshipful mood. These churches are normally much larger with a much bigger production. Why has church culture made this shift to more modern technology? Some see it as distracting or unnecessary in a worship environment, but on the other hand, some would say it's completely necessary and important for worship. The answer behind this question is pretty simple: to keep up with the secular world. Modern concert halls and arenas all have these new and great pieces of technology. The purpose behind them is to primarily make the overall experience better for the audience, as well as introducing new technology to the public and finding new purposes for it. In order to keep up and keep the attention of churchgoers, churches began to make this move towards modern technology in their church services. One of the biggest areas of change in the modern church is lighting. The change from a naturally lit building with fluorescent lighting to arenas filled with LEDs and moving lights is a huge difference, and it has made a huge impact on modern churches. Let me begin by explaining the different types of lighting and the difference it can make in a room. The first type of lighting is very common, and it is the tungsten light, or also referred to as the Edison bulb. This is a very common type of lighting in homes and small venues. There's also fluorescent bulbs and LEDs, which is also very common. There is also HID, or high-intensity discharge lamp, which is very common in lighting for gymnasiums. These are the kind of lights that take a few minutes to fully turn on, like the ones that we have in chapel. There's also ceramic metal halide, also referred to as arc source lamps, which is a very different type of light fixture and is mostly seen on wash lights to light up a whole stage, or it's used in moving heads. These type of lights are more common in higher production venues like modern churches and arenas. Now, why is this important? All of these light sources have different color properties, which makes it super important when trying to design a venue or a church. For example, when you're trying to make all of these light sources to produce the color white, you may notice that they all have a slightly different color to them. Some light sources produce specific colors more than others. LEDs tend to display more blue than other lamps, so the white that it makes tends to have more of a blue tint to it. This is a great contrast to sunlight, which is fairly even across the lighting spectrum. This is why natural light is best for pictures and video in order to create an even amount of color in their shots. Lighting in a church setting is very important for setting the stage. The concept of dimming the house lights and illuminating the stage is to create an environment that provides an intimate time of worship, specifically between you and God. It's also important to light up the worship leaders on stage so they have the ability to do their job and lead the congregation. The overall purpose for this is to allow the congregation to feel free in God's presence without any distraction and not worrying about those around you. Although this is the intention, it's often misunderstood on why we light the stage and give the attention to the worship leaders. This misconception is based off of the relation of a church service to a rock concert and making the band look like they're the stars of the show based on the production by itself. The idea behind it is to give the attention to the worship leaders so they can direct the attention to the Lord during worship. Another big controversy with lighting and production is the use of moving heads and effects. It's very important to understand the difference between worship and just a concert. However, the idea of why we should be using these lights is simply the fact of how the audience connects to them. They help the band dynamically between songs, from a fast and energetic song to a slow and intimate song. People connect with their eyes just as much as they do with their ears. People connect with the lights just as much as they do with the sound system they're hearing. For this reason, it's important to include lights in modern worship. Younger people are wanting more technology and production in church to connect with God. The big question churches are facing is, why do we need to keep up with the secular world when it comes to technology? The reason is to connect with the younger generation and to keep them in an intimate relationship with God. Having this kind of technology in church gives them a reason and a want and a desire to go to church to hear God's word. We live in a world that demands production to keep their attention. This is why younger people tend to be attracted to high production events like concerts rather than traditional church services. Young people are the next generation of the church. If we do not strive to put all of our efforts into reaching them, we won't have much of a future congregation devoted to God. This is why production in ministry is crucial. It isn't to put on a show. It isn't to focus the attention towards the production itself. The reason is to attract youth into the church and provide them and the current church members a space of intimacy with the Lord. This is why lighting is important.